In suburban Seattle, a 72-year-old grandmother was about to discover a devastating truth. What started as a peaceful Sunday dinner took a shocking turn when she saw 3 words on her grandson's phone: "Just die already." Leah Douglas wasn't your typical retiree. For 30 years, she had been a beloved librarian, known for her compassionate listening and quiet wisdom. When she encountered Danny's cruel text message, she had no idea she was walking into a family crisis. Leah's heartbreaking discovery would lead to revelations about caregiving, sacrifice, and miscommunication. What began as apparent betrayal would become unexpected healing. The Douglas family would never be the same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The October rain drummed against the windows of Leah Douglas's Craftsman home, creating a rhythm that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat during her 15 years in Seattle. At 72, she had learned to find comfort in such sounds, the steady percussion of Pacific Northwest weather that marked the passing of seasons and the quiet constancy of home. Tonight, however, the rain served as a gentle backdrop to something far more precious, the laughter echoing from her dining room. "Grandma Leah, you should have seen this guy's face when I told him his entire database was corrupted," Danny was saying. His fork paused halfway to his mouth as he recounted his latest work adventure. 3 hours of panic before I revealed I'd already backed everything up. Leah smiled, watching her grandson's animated gestures. At 26, Danny had inherited her late husband's expressive hands, always moving, always painting pictures in the air to accompany his stories. It was one of the many ways he reminded her of Gerald, though she'd never told him so. Some observations were too precious to share, even with those you loved most. "That's terrible, Danny," Jenna laughed, shaking her head as she reached for the wine glass beside her plate. "Remind me never to trust you with anything important." "Hey, I'm extremely trustworthy," Danny protested, grinning. "I just believe in keeping people on their toes. Builds character." Leah observed the easy banter between them, noting how Jenna's eyes sparkled when she looked at Danny, how her grandson's entire posture relaxed in his girlfriend's presence. In the 2 years since Danny had started bringing Jenna to these Sunday dinners, Leah had watched their relationship deepen from the careful politeness of new romance to something more substantial. Something that reminded her of her own early days with Gerald, when the world seemed full of possibilities and love felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Speaking of building character," Jenna said, turning to include Leah in the conversation, "tell us about your most challenging patron from the library days." "Danny's always saying you have the best stories." Leah's fingers traced the rim of her water glass as she considered the question. The truth was, she missed those stories, missed having a repository of experiences that others found entertaining. Retirement had slowly stripped away her professional identity, leaving her with a growing sense that her most interesting chapters were behind her. "Oh, there was Mrs. Henderson," she began, her voice finding its storytelling cadence. "She came in every Tuesday for 3 years, absolutely convinced we were hiding the real history books from her. She was certain the moon landing was staged, that the government was rewriting textbooks." "What did you do?" Jenna leaned forward, genuinely interested. "I listened," Leah said simply. "Every Tuesday for 3 years. Sometimes listening is the only gift you can give someone." Danny reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's why you were the best librarian in the city. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his voice, these moments were what sustained Leah through the long stretches between visits." Since his parents had moved to Denver 18 months ago, Danny had become her primary connection to family, to the feeling that she mattered in someone's daily life. "I wasn't the best," she protested, though she appreciated the sentiment. "I was just present." "Present counts for a lot," Jenna said quietly, and something in her tone made Leah study the young woman more carefully. As a nurse, Jenna understood the weight of presence, the way showing up could mean everything to someone who felt forgotten by the world. Danny's phone buzzed against the table, its screen lighting up with a text notification. He glanced at it briefly, then stood. "Sorry, I need to use the bathroom. Be right back." Take your time, dear, Leah said, beginning to stack the dinner plates. Jenna and I will handle the dishes. Actually, let me help with that, Jenna offered, rising from her chair. You cooked this amazing meal. The least I can do is clean up. Nonsense, Leah waved her off, though she appreciated the offer. You're a guest in my home. As Jenna began collecting the serving dishes despite Leah's protests, Danny's phone buzzed again. The screen lit up, displaying a text conversation that caught Leah's attention purely by accident. She wasn't in the habit of reading other people's messages, but the phone lay directly in her line of sight as she reached for the salt shaker. The sender was listed as Tommy K. The message thread was brief, but the words seemed to leap off the screen. Tommy K., how's your grandma doing? Still managing okay? Below it, Danny's response, sent just moments ago. Danny, just die already. Leah's hand froze halfway to the salt shaker. The words registered in her mind, with the slow, sinking realization of someone watching an accident unfold in slow motion. She blinked, certain she had misread, but the text remained unchanged on the bright screen. Just die already. Her grandson's words. About her. The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the foundation of her craftsman home, solid for nearly a century, had suddenly shifted. The sound of Jenna moving dishes in the kitchen faded to a distant murmur, replaced by the thundering of her own heartbeat. She stared at the phone, willing the words to change, to reveal themselves as some cruel optical illusion brought on by her aging eyes. But they remained stubbornly, devastatingly clear. Leah, are you okay? Jenna's voice seemed to come from very far away. Leah forced herself to look up, to arrange her features into something resembling normalcy. Yes, dear, just thinking. But thinking had become nearly impossible. The three words cycled through her mind like a broken record. Just die already. The casual cruelty of it, the dismissive tone that reduced her entire existence to an inconvenience. How long had Danny felt this way? How long had she been fooling herself about their relationship, about the love she thought they shared? The sound of the toilet flushing upstairs jolted her back to the present. Danny would be returning any moment, and she needed to compose herself. She was Leah Douglas, retired librarian, widow, grandmother, a woman who had spent decades maintaining dignity in the face of difficult patrons, bureaucratic frustrations, and the thousand small indignities that came with growing older in a world that increasingly valued only the young. She could manage this. She had to. Danny's footsteps echoed on the stairs, each one bringing him closer to a conversation that would now be fundamentally different than the one he expected. How do you look at someone you love after discovering they wish you dead? How do you smile and make small talk when your heart is breaking? Sorry about that, Danny said, sliding back into his chair and reaching for his phone. Where were we? I was just telling Jenna about the time you tried to reorganize my entire kitchen, Leah said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. You were 12, and convinced that alphabetizing everything would make cooking more efficient. Danny laughed, pocketing his phone without looking at it. I still think that was a good idea. How much time do you waste looking for oregano when it could be filed under O? About as much time as I spent finding everything you'd moved, Leah replied, managing what she hoped was a convincing smile. But even as she participated in the familiar rhythm of their conversation, part of her mind remained fixed on those three words, just die already. The casualness of it suggested this wasn't a moment of frustrated hyperbole, but rather an honest expression of a long-held sentiment. Her grandson, her beloved Danny, who had moved back to Seattle specifically to be close to her, who brought her groceries and fixed her leaky faucets and called her every few days, secretly wished she would disappear from his life permanently. The realization settled over her like a heavy blanket, muffling the sounds of the evening and making everything feel distant and unreal. She watched Danny's face as he continued talking, searching for signs of the impatience and resentment that must have been building beneath his careful smiles. Had she been such a burden? Had her need for occasional help with shopping and household tasks created a prison that her grandson was too kind to acknowledge? Grandma? Danny's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. You seem a little quiet tonight. Everything okay? The concern in his eyes looked genuine, But how could she trust her own judgment now? If she had been so wrong about his fundamental feelings toward her, what else had she misunderstood? "I'm fine, dear," she lied, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Jenna was studying her with the trained eye of a healthcare professional, and Leah knew she hadn't been entirely successful at hiding her distress. But she wouldn't, break down in front of them. Not when she needed time to process what she'd discovered, to figure out how to navigate this new reality, where the person she loved most in the world apparently saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to be endured. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. She hugged them both goodbye, accepted Danny's usual promise to call her during the week, and watched from her front window as they drove away in the rain. Only when their taillights disappeared around the corner did she allow herself to sink into her favorite armchair and confront the full weight of what had happened. "Just die already." The words echoed in the silence of her empty house, bouncing off the walls like accusation. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, but now it sounded less like comfort and more like a countdown, marking time until she would somehow have to face Danny again, knowing what she knew. How did you pretend to love someone who wished you dead? How did you continue living when the person who mattered most to you saw your existence as a burden to be endured, rather than a relationship to be cherished? Leah pulled her grandmother's quilt closer around her shoulders and stared out at the rain-soaked street, wondering if she would ever feel warm again. Marcus's hand tightened on the rope as he finished securing the boat. The morning mist clung to the lake's surface like unspoken words, and he found himself thinking of his neighbor, Leah Douglas. He'd noticed her kitchen light burning well past midnight again, the third time this week. In 8 years of living next door, he'd learned to read the subtle signs of distress, the way someone carried themselves, the patterns that shifted when life became too heavy to bear alone. He'd seen it in his own clients during his 30 years as a social worker, and he recognized it now in the increasing isolation of the woman who had once greeted him warmly over the fence each morning. 3 days had passed since that Sunday dinner, and Leah moved through her routines like someone sleepwalking through her own life. The revelation of Danny's text message had created a fissure in her world that seemed to widen with each passing hour. She found herself analyzing every interaction they'd shared over the past months, searching for signs of the resentment that must have been building beneath his careful smiles. Had his hugs been perfunctory? Had his weekly grocery runs been performed with gritted teeth? The questions circled her mind like vultures, picking at her confidence until she questioned the very foundation of what she'd believed about their relationship. Tuesday morning brought Danny's usual call, his voice carrying its familiar warmth as he asked about her plans for the day. "I was thinking of stopping by after work," he said. "Maybe we could grab dinner at that Thai place you like?" "Oh, that's sweet of you, dear," Leah replied, her fingers gripping the phone tighter than necessary. "But I'm actually feeling a bit tired." "Rain check?" A pause. "Are you feeling okay? You sound different." The concern in his voice might have been genuine, but now she heard it through the filter of what she knew. Was he worried about her health, or merely calculating how much longer he'd have to endure her presence? "I'm fine," she lied, the words coming easier each time she spoke them. "Just one of those days." After hanging up, she sat in her kitchen staring at the phone, wondering how many more conversations like this she could manage before the pretense became unbearable. The house felt larger around her, each room echoing with the weight of her solitude. Wednesday brought another call, this one from Lisa in Denver. Leah let it go to voicemail, unable to face the cheerful chatter from her daughter-in-law about work promotions and Denver's autumn weather. The message played back an hour later, Lisa's voice filling the empty kitchen. "Hi, Leah, just checking in. Danny mentioned you seemed a little under the weather. Call me back when you get a chance. Love you." Love. The word felt hollow now, a social convention rather than a genuine expression of feeling. How many people said they loved her, while secretly counting the days until they wouldn't have to anymore? That afternoon, she attempted to reach a book from the highest shelf in her living room, a volume of poetry she'd been meaning to reread. The step stool wobbled beneath her feet as she stretched upward, and for a moment she felt herself falling. Her hand shot out instinctively, catching the bookshelf, but her ankle twisted as she stumbled down, sending sharp pain shooting up her leg. She sat on the floor for several minutes, less hurt than humiliated. This was exactly the kind of incident that would confirm Danny's apparent wishes. Proof that she was declining, becoming more of a burden with each passing day. The rational part of her mind knew she should call someone, should have the ankle looked at, but the larger part couldn't bear the thought of creating more work for people who already resented her existence. Instead, she limped to the kitchen and wrapped ice in a dish towel, settling into her chair with her foot elevated. The physical pain was manageable, but it served as a stark reminder of her increasing fragility. How many more falls would there be? How many more moments of weakness that would add weight to Danny's apparent burden? That evening, she stood at her bedroom window watching the Douglas house through the gathering dusk. Danny's car sat in the driveway, and she could see warm light spilling from the kitchen windows. He was probably having dinner with Jenna, the two of them discussing their future. A future that, according to his text message, would be brighter without an aging grandmother requiring care and attention. The thought brought fresh waves of hurt, but underneath the pain was something else, a growing sense of resignation. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps she had outlived her usefulness, become more burden than blessing in the lives of those she loved. Thursday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching her mood perfectly. She'd slept poorly again, her dreams filled with fragments of conversations where people smiled while wishing her gone. The coffee tasted bitter, and even her favorite morning program on NPR failed to hold her attention. When Danny called around noon, she almost didn't answer. "Grandma, I'm worried about you," he said without preamble. "You've been different lately, distant. Did something happen?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. Part of her wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation for those 3 devastating words she'd seen on his phone. But another part, the part that had spent 72 years learning to read social situations and navigate difficult conversations, recognized that such a confrontation would only make things worse for everyone involved. "I'm just having a rough patch," she said instead. "Nothing for you to worry about." "But I do worry," he insisted, and she heard genuine distress in his voice. "You're the most important person in my life. If something's wrong, I want to help." The irony was almost unbearable. Here he was, expressing concern for someone he apparently wished dead, performing the role of the loving grandson with such conviction that she might have believed it if she hadn't seen the truth written in his own words. "I know you do, sweetheart," she managed. "I just need some time to myself. Space to think." "Space from me?" The hurt in his voice was unmistakable, and for a moment she wavered. But then she remembered the casual cruelty of his text, the way he'd dismissed her entire existence with such apparent ease. "Space from everyone," she said softly. "I'm sorry, Danny, I need to figure some things out." After ending the call, she sat in her living room surrounded by the accumulation of 7 decades of life. Photographs, books, mementos from a career spent helping others, gifts from family members who had claimed to love her. Now it all felt like evidence of a life that had gone on too long, a collection of memories that had become a burden rather than a treasure. The afternoon brought a knock at her door. Through the peephole, she saw Marcus Thompson standing on her porch, holding a covered dish. Her first instinct was to pretend she wasn't home, but she knew he'd seen her car in the driveway, knew that her kitchen light had been burning at odd hours. "Hello, Marcus," she said, opening the door with what she hoped was a welcoming smile. "Leah," he said, his trained eye immediately noting the careful way she was favoring her left ankle. "I made too much chili, and I know how you feel about food waste." It was a transparent excuse. Marcus lived alone and was far too practical to accidentally make excess food, but she appreciated the kindness behind the gesture. She accepted the dish and invited him in, grateful for the distraction from her own spiraling thoughts. "How have you been?" he asked, settling into Gerald's old chair as if he belonged there. "Fine," she replied automatically, then caught herself. Marcus had spent 3 decades listening to people's problems, learning to read the spaces between words. He would see through her pretense as easily as she'd once seen through her library patrons' claims that they'd returned books they'd actually lost. "Actually," she amended, "I've been better. He nodded, waiting with the patient silence that had made him effective in his professional life. She found herself wanting to tell him everything. About the text message, about her growing sense of being a burden, about the way Danny's apparent resentment had reframed every interaction they'd shared. But shame held her tongue. How could she admit that her beloved grandson wished her dead? How could she explain that the person she'd believed loved her most apparently saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to be endured? "Sometimes," she said instead, "I wonder if I've outlived my purpose." Marcus's expression grew more serious. "What makes you think that?" "I don't contribute anything anymore," she said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "I'm not working, not raising children, not useful. I'm just taking up space, using resources, requiring care from people who have their own lives to live." "Leah," Marcus said gently, "usefulness isn't the measure of a life's value. Connection is. Love is. The relationships we build, the memories we create, the wisdom we share, these things matter more than productivity." She wanted to believe him, but the evidence suggested otherwise. If her connections were so valuable, why did Danny wish she would disappear? If her love meant something, why was it apparently such a burden? "I'm tired, Marcus," she said finally. "Tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. Tired of being a responsibility instead of a joy. Tired of taking up space in other people's lives." He studied her face for a long moment, and she saw recognition there, the look of someone who had heard similar words before, who understood the dangerous territory she was navigating. "Have you talked to Danny about these feelings?" he asked. The question hit closer to home than she'd expected. "Danny has enough to worry about," she said. "He doesn't need to carry my burdens too." But even as she spoke, she wondered if it was already too late. Perhaps he was already carrying those burdens, and they had become too heavy to bear. Perhaps his text message had been the honest expression of someone who had reached his breaking point, who could no longer pretend that caring for an aging grandmother was anything other than an unwelcome obligation. Marcus stayed for another hour, and his presence provided temporary relief from the weight of her thoughts. But after he left, the silence returned, along with the questions that had been circling her mind for days. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold between her hands, staring at the phone. She could call Danny, could try to have the conversation that might clear the air between them. But what if the conversation only confirmed her worst fears? What if he was too kind to be honest about his feelings, too burdened by duty to admit that he wished he could be free of her? The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Danny's name appeared on the caller ID, and she found herself frozen, unable to answer. She listened to it ring until it went to voicemail, then played back his message with trembling fingers. "Grandma, I'm really worried about you. You're not acting like yourself, and I can't shake the feeling that something's seriously wrong. I love you, and I need you to know that. Whatever's going on, we can work through it together. Please call me back." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and for a moment she wavered. But then she remembered those 3 words on his phone, the casual dismissal of her entire existence. Actions spoke louder than words. And his actions, his private, unguarded expression of his true feelings, had revealed a truth that no amount of concerned phone calls could erase. She deleted the message without calling him back, then sat in her empty kitchen as darkness fell outside. Tomorrow would bring another day of pretending, another day of carrying the weight of what she'd discovered. The question was no longer whether she could continue living with this knowledge, but whether she could find a way to spare everyone else the burden of her continued existence. Outside, the rain began to fall again, drumming against the windows with the same rhythm that had provided comfort just days before. But now it sounded different, less like comfort and more like a countdown, marking time until she would have to decide what to do with the devastating truth she'd uncovered. The Douglas family thought they were protecting each other with their careful silences and polite pretenses. But Leah was beginning to understand that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was to stop being a burden to those you loved most. The realization settled over her like a heavy blanket, and she sat in the darkness, wondering if Danny would finally be able to breathe freely once his wish came true. Danny stared at his phone screen, Leah's voicemail playing for the 3rd time that morning. Her voice sounded different, hollow, distant, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. He'd left 2 messages yesterday and another this morning, each one met with the same silence that had characterized their interactions for the past week. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. He sat at his desk in the downtown Seattle office building, pretending to review code while his mind churned with worry. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their harsh glow over cubicles filled with developers typing away at keyboards. But Danny couldn't focus on the screen in front of him. Every instinct he possessed was screaming that his grandmother was in trouble, and he was failing her by not knowing how to help. "You look like hell," came a voice from behind him. Danny turned to find his supervisor, Mike, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thanks for the pep talk," Danny replied, accepting the offered cup gratefully. "Seriously, though, you've been distracted all week. Everything okay at home?" Danny considered the question. Was everything okay? His grandmother had been acting strange, avoiding his calls, declining his visits, speaking in monosyllables when she did pick up the phone. But he couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed or when it had started. "Family stuff," he said finally. "My grandmother's been off lately. I'm worried about her." Mike nodded sympathetically. "How old is she?" 72. She's been on her own since my grandfather died 3 years ago. I try to check on her regularly, but lately she's been pushing me away." "Could be depression?" Mike suggested. "My mom went through something similar after Dad passed. Sometimes they need professional help, not just family support." The suggestion lodged itself in Danny's mind as he returned to his work. Professional help. He'd been so focused on trying to be everything his grandmother needed, companion, helper, support system, that he hadn't considered whether his efforts were actually enough. By lunch, his worry had crystallized into action. He pulled out his phone and dialed Jenna's number, knowing she'd be on her break at the hospital. "Hey, babe," her voice came through clear and concerned. "How's the day going?" "Not great," Danny admitted, stepping out of the office building into the crisp October air. "I'm worried about Grandma Leah. She's been acting really strange lately, and I don't know what to do." "Strange how?" Danny found himself struggling to articulate the specifics. "She's been avoiding me, declining visits, cutting phone calls short, just withdrawing. It's like she's become a different person overnight." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Danny, when did this start? Can you pinpoint when her behavior changed?" He thought back, trying to trace the timeline. "It was sometime after last Sunday's dinner. She seemed fine during the meal, but now that I think about it, she got quiet toward the end of the evening. I thought she was just tired. And it's been consistent since then? Getting worse, actually. She won't let me come over, barely talks when I call. I left her a voicemail this morning, practically begging her to tell me what's wrong." Jenna's voice shifted into what Danny recognized as her professional mode, the tone she used when assessing patients and their families. "Danny, I need you to think carefully about this. Has she mentioned feeling like a burden lately? Any comments about being tired of life, or feeling like people would be better off without her?" The question sent a chill down Danny's spine. "Not directly, but—" He paused, remembering fragments of conversations. "She's made some comments about not wanting to be a bother. About being too much trouble." "Those are warning signs," Jenna said firmly, "especially in elderly people who are dealing with loss and isolation. Social withdrawal is often one of the first indicators of depression." "You think she's depressed?" "I think she needs to be evaluated by someone who can make that determination." "But Danny, the sudden behavior change is concerning. Sometimes older adults can experience rapid onset depression, especially when they're dealing with multiple stressors." Danny felt his chest tighten. "What kind of stressors?" "Think about it from her perspective. She's been widowed for 3 years. She's dealing with the normal physical changes that come with aging, and she's probably hyper-aware of becoming more dependent on others. Add to that the fact that your parents moved away, leaving her with a smaller support network." The picture Jenna was painting made Danny's stomach churn. He'd been so focused on his own challenges, balancing work, his relationship, and his caregiving responsibilities, that he hadn't fully considered the weight his grandmother might be carrying. "What do I do?" he asked. "First, you need to have a direct conversation with her, not about errands or dinner plans, but about how she's feeling. Ask her directly if she's been having thoughts about hurting herself." "Jesus, Jenna, you think it's that serious?" "I think it could be. And Danny, you need to call your parents. This isn't something you should be handling alone." After ending the call with Jenna, Danny sat on a bench outside his office building, staring at his phone. The thought of calling his mother filled him with a complex mix of emotions, relief at the prospect of sharing his burden, but also resentment that it had come to this. He dialed his mother's number, noting that it was mid-afternoon in Denver. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the professional cheerfulness she'd cultivated in her marketing career. "Danny, what a nice surprise. How are you?" "Mom, I'm worried about Grandma Leah." The shift in her tone was immediate. "What's wrong? Is she okay?" "I don't know. She's been acting really strange lately. Withdrawing, avoiding me, not returning calls. Jenna thinks she might be depressed." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There was a long pause. "Oh, honey, I was afraid something like this might happen." "What do you mean?" "She's been so isolated since your father and I moved to Denver. I call her every few days, but phone calls aren't the same as being there. And with you working so much." Danny felt a flare of defensiveness. "I check on her constantly. I bring her groceries, I invite her to dinner, I know you do," his mother interrupted gently. "I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying that maybe it's not enough. Maybe she needs more support than any one person can provide." The words hit harder than Danny expected. He'd been killing himself trying to be everything his grandmother needed, and apparently he was failing. "What do you think I should do?" "I think I need to come to Seattle," Lisa said without hesitation. "I can work remotely for a few days, and your father can manage things here." "When was the last time you had a real conversation with her?" Danny thought about it. "I've been trying to call her every day, but she keeps the conversation short. When I ask if she's okay, she says she's fine, but she's clearly not." "Sometimes people need permission to not be fine," his mother said quietly. "Sometimes they need someone to ask the right questions." "What are the right questions?" "Questions about how she's really feeling. About whether she's been having dark thoughts. About whether she feels like she's a burden to the people she loves." The last question hit Danny like a physical blow. Why would she feel like a burden? Because she's 72 years old, recently widowed, and increasingly dependent on her grandson for basic needs. Because she's probably very aware that you have your own life to live, and she might be feeling guilty about requiring so much of your time and attention. Danny sat in stunned silence, processing his mother's words. Had his grandmother been feeling like a burden? Had his attempts to help her somehow made her feel worse about her situation? "I never wanted her to feel that way," he said finally. "I know you didn't. But sometimes the people we love most are the ones who worry most about being a burden to us." That evening, Danny sat in his apartment with Jenna, both of them eating takeout Chinese food while discussing the day's revelations. The conversation with his mother had left him feeling raw and uncertain, questioning every interaction he'd had with his grandmother over the past few months. "I keep thinking about things she's said," Danny told Jenna, picking at his lo mein. "Little comments about not wanting to be a bother, about being too much trouble. I thought she was just being polite, but maybe she was trying to tell me something." "Depression can be insidious," Jenna said. "It convinces people that they're worthless, that everyone would be better off without them. And older adults are particularly vulnerable because they're dealing with so many losses: physical capability, independence, social connections. I should have seen it coming. Danny, you're not a mind reader. And you're not a mental health professional. You're a grandson who loves his grandmother and has been doing his best to take care of her. But doing his best didn't feel like enough. Not when his grandmother was apparently suffering in silence. Not when she was withdrawing from the one person who was supposed to be her primary support. "My mom's flying in tomorrow," he said, She thinks maybe Grandma needs to hear from someone other than me. That's probably smart. Sometimes it's easier to open up to someone who isn't part of your daily routine. Danny nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd failed somehow. His grandmother had been struggling, possibly for weeks or months, and he'd been oblivious to her pain. How many signs had he missed? How many opportunities had he had to reach out and address what was happening? What if it's too late? He asked quietly. What if she's already made up her mind about whatever she's thinking? Jenna reached across the table and took his hand. Then you intervene. You get her professional help. You don't let her handle this alone. But what if she won't accept help? Then you make it clear that accepting help isn't optional. Sometimes people need to be forced to accept support, especially when they're not thinking clearly. The next morning, Danny called his grandmother again. This time she answered on the first ring. Hello, Danny. Her voice was flat, emotionless, and it sent chills down his spine. Grandma, I'm coming over. We need to talk. That's not necessary. I'm fine. You're not fine. And I'm not taking no for an answer. There was a long pause. I don't want to see anyone right now. I understand that. But I need to see you. I need to know you're okay. I'm okay. No, you're not. And that's okay too. But we need to talk about what's going on. Another pause. Danny, I don't want to be a burden. Stop, he interrupted. Don't say that. You're not a burden. You're my grandmother, and I love you, and I'm worried about you. He heard her take a shaky breath. I'm just tired. I know. But you don't have to carry whatever you're carrying alone. I'm here, and Mom's coming to town, and we're going to figure this out together. Your mother's coming? She's worried about you too. We all are. For the first time in days, he heard something other than resignation in her voice. I don't want to worry anyone. Grandma, that's what family is for. We worry about each other. We take care of each other. That's not a burden. That's love. The silence stretched between them, and Danny held his breath, waiting for her response. I suppose you could come over, she said finally. But I don't want to talk about anything heavy. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about, Danny promised. I just want to see you. After hanging up, he sat in his car for several minutes, preparing himself for what might be the most important conversation of his life. He had no idea what he was going to say. No script for how to address the possibility that his grandmother might be contemplating ending her life. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her face whatever darkness she was struggling with alone. Whatever it took, whatever conversations needed to be had, whatever professional help needed to be sought, he was going to make sure she knew that she was loved, needed, and valued. The drive to her house felt longer than usual, each traffic light an eternity. But as he pulled into her driveway and saw her familiar silhouette in the window, he felt something he hadn't experienced in days. Hope? Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still time to reach her, to pull her back from whatever edge she was approaching. Maybe love would be enough to bridge the gap that had opened between them. He was about to find out. Danny's hands trembled slightly as he knocked on his grandmother's front door. The familiar sound of her footsteps approaching seemed to take longer than usual, each step measured and careful. When the door finally opened, he was struck by how much she'd changed in just a week. Her usually bright eyes were dulled with exhaustion, her shoulders curved inward as if she were trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice carrying none of its usual warmth. "Come in." The house felt different too, not just quiet, but hollow, as if the life had been slowly draining from it. Danny noticed the stack of unopened mail on the hallway table, the way the curtains were drawn tighter than usual, blocking out the afternoon light. Even the air seemed heavier, weighted with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. "Can I make you some tea?" Leah asked, already moving toward the kitchen with the automatic politeness that had been ingrained in her since childhood. "Grandma, sit down," Danny said gently, placing a hand on her arm. "I'll make the tea. You just rest." She looked at him with surprise, as if the simple act of being cared for had become foreign to her. "You don't need to. I want to," he interrupted, guiding her to her favorite chair in the living room. "Just give me a few minutes." As he moved around her kitchen, Danny found himself noting details he'd previously missed. The refrigerator was nearly empty, except for a few wilted vegetables and expired milk. The sink held only a single cup and plate, evidence of meals eaten alone without enthusiasm. The pill organizer on the counter was full. She wasn't even keeping up with her medications. Each observation added weight to his growing understanding of how deeply his grandmother was struggling. This wasn't just a rough patch or a temporary mood. This was someone who had stopped taking care of herself, who had lost the will to maintain the basic routines that kept life functional. He returned to the living room with 2 cups of tea, settling into the chair that had been his grandfather's favorite spot. For several minutes they sat in silence, the only sound the gentle ticking of the mantel clock that had marked time in this house for decades. "Grandma," Danny began carefully, "I need you to talk to me. Really talk to me. Something's wrong, and I can't help you if I don't understand what's happening." Leah's hands wrapped around her teacup, as if trying to absorb its warmth. "I'm fine, Danny. Just tired." "You're not fine," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've been avoiding me for a week. You're not eating, you're not taking your medications, and you look like you haven't slept in days. That's not fine." She glanced up at him, and for a moment he saw a flash of something in her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or fear. But it was quickly suppressed, replaced by the careful mask she'd been wearing all week. "I don't want to be a burden," she said quietly. "You're not a burden. You're my grandmother, your family." "Family can be burdensome too," she replied, and something in her tone made Danny's chest tighten with alarm. "What makes you think you're a burden?" Leah was quiet for so long that Danny wondered if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know what you really think about me." The words hit Danny like a physical blow. "What I think about you? Grandma, I think you're wonderful. I think you're strong and wise and—" "Stop," she interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp. "Just stop pretending." "I'm not pretending anything. I love you." "You love me?" Her laugh was bitter, unlike any sound he'd ever heard from her. "You love me so much that you wish I would just die already?" Danny felt the world tilt around him. "What?" "I saw it," she said, her voice breaking. "On your phone. Last Sunday. When you went to the bathroom, your phone was on the table, and I saw the message. Tommy asked about me, and you said—" She took a shuddering breath. "You said, just die already." The memory hit Danny like a freight train. The text exchange with Tommy. The overwhelming exhaustion he'd been feeling. The way the question about his grandmother's health had come at the end of a particularly brutal week. He remembered typing those words, but not in the context Leah had interpreted them. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Grandma, no, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she said, tears now streaming down her face. "I understand that I've become such a burden to you that you wish I would disappear. I understand that every time you help me with groceries or fix something in my house, you're thinking about how much easier your life would be if I were gone." "That's not what happened," Danny said desperately. "That's not what the text meant." "Then what did it mean?" she demanded, finally looking directly at him. "What else could 'just die already' possibly mean?" Danny ran his hands through his hair, trying to find the words to explain. "It wasn't about you. It was about—" God, this is going to sound terrible, but it was about my situation. My job, my stress, everything that's been piling up. When Tommy asked about you, I was having this moment of complete overwhelm, and I was thinking about how I felt like I was drowning." "So you were thinking about me," Leah said flatly. "I was thinking about everything. Work has been insane. I've been pulling 60-hour weeks trying to meet deadlines. Jenna and I have been fighting because I'm never available, because I'm always worried about something. I haven't slept properly in months because I'm constantly thinking about whether you're okay, whether you need something, whether I'm doing enough." Leah's expression shifted slightly, confusion replacing some of the hurt. "You're worried about me?" "I am terrified about you," Danny admitted. "Every day. I lie awake at night wondering if you're going to fall and not be able to get up. I worry that you're lonely, that you're not eating enough, that you're not taking your medications. I check my phone constantly in case you need something. But the text was about me falling apart," Danny said, his voice cracking. "When Tommy asked about you, I was having this moment of complete panic about all the ways I'm failing everyone. I was thinking about how I feel like I'm dying under all this pressure, and I typed, 'Just die already,' because that's how I felt about myself in that moment." The silence that followed was deafening. Leah stared at him, her tea forgotten in her hands, as she processed what he'd said. "You felt like you were dying?" she asked quietly. "I feel like I'm drowning," Danny admitted. "I love you more than anything, but I'm 26 years old, and I feel like I'm carrying the weight of the world. I can't keep up with work, my relationship is suffering, and I'm constantly terrified that something's going to happen to you and it'll be my fault because I wasn't paying attention or I wasn't there fast enough." "Danny," she whispered, "I never wanted you to see that text because I knew it would hurt you and I knew you'd misunderstand it. But I swear to you, on Grandpa's grave, that it wasn't about wishing you were dead. It was about wishing I knew how to handle everything better." Leah set down her teacup with shaking hands. "You're overwhelmed." "I'm completely overwhelmed," he confirmed. "But that doesn't mean I don't want you in my life. It means I don't know how to balance everything, and I've been too proud to ask for help." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to worry you. Because I thought I could handle it. Because I was afraid that if I admitted I was struggling, you'd think I didn't want to take care of you." "So you've been suffering in silence," she said softly. "And apparently, so have you." They sat in the growing dusk, both of them processing the weight of what had been revealed. Danny could see his grandmother's mind working, reassessing the past week through this new lens of understanding. "I thought you hated me," she said finally. "I could never hate you. You're the most important person in my life." "But you're drowning." "I'm drowning," he confirmed. "But not because of you. Because I don't know how to ask for help. Because I've been trying to be everything to everyone, and I'm not equipped for that. Your parents are in Denver, dealing with their own stress about Dad's job and their new life. I didn't want to worry them either. So you've been carrying all of this alone. Just like you've been carrying your worry about being a burden alone." The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. They had both been protecting each other from their own pain, creating a cycle of isolation and misunderstanding that had nearly destroyed their relationship. "I've been so cruel to you this week," Leah said, fresh tears starting to fall. "I've been punishing you for something you didn't even do." "You were protecting yourself," Danny said gently. "You thought I didn't want you around, so you started pulling away first. I understand that, but I made you suffer more. And I made you suffer by not being honest about my struggles. We both messed up." Leah reached out and took his hand, her fingers feeling fragile but warm. "What do we do now?" "Now we figure out how to do better," Danny said. "We ask for help. We talk to Mom and Dad about sharing the responsibility. We look into support services. We stop trying to protect each other from reality." "I don't want to be a burden to your parents." "You're not a burden to anyone, you're family. And family takes care of each other. But it has to be sustainable. We have to find a way to make sure you're safe and cared for without anyone drowning in the process." "I thought about it," Leah said quietly. "This week I thought about ending things. I thought maybe everyone would be better off." Danny felt his heart stop. "Grandma, I know it was wrong. But I was so hurt, and I felt so useless, and I thought maybe if I wasn't here anymore, you could have your life back." "My life isn't complete without you in it," Danny said fiercely. "Do you understand that? You're not taking away from my life. You're part of what makes it meaningful. Even when I'm difficult, even when I need help, especially then. That's what love is, showing up for each other when things are hard. They sat together as full darkness fell outside, both of them emotionally drained but somehow lighter than they'd been in weeks. The terrible misunderstanding that had driven them apart was finally in the open, and while the underlying problems remained, they now had a foundation of honesty on which to build solutions. "I'm sorry," Leah said finally, "for pushing you away, for making this harder than it had to be." "I'm sorry too," Danny replied, "for not being honest about my struggles, for making you feel like you couldn't talk to me." "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" "We're family," Danny said simply. "And we're going to figure this out together." Outside, the Seattle rain began to fall again, but this time it sounded less like a countdown and more like a cleansing, washing away the hurt and misunderstanding that had accumulated between them, making space for the honest conversations that would need to come next. The confrontation was over, but the real work was just beginning. The rain continued its steady drumbeat against the windows as Danny and Leah sat in the growing darkness of her living room. The weight of their mutual confessions hung between them like a bridge half-built, sturdy enough to support their first tentative steps toward understanding, but requiring more construction before it could bear the full weight of their relationship's repair. Danny knew he owed his grandmother more than just an explanation of the text message. She deserved to understand the full context of his struggles, the mounting pressures that had led to that moment of desperate exhaustion when Tommy's innocent question had triggered such a raw response. "I need to tell you everything," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "About what's been happening with me, with work, with everything. You deserve to know why I've been falling apart." Leah nodded, settling deeper into her chair. "I want to understand." Danny took a deep breath, trying to organize the chaos of the past few months into something coherent. "It started about 6 months ago, when they restructured my department at work. Half the team was laid off, but they kept all the same deadlines and projects. Suddenly, I was doing the work of 3 people." He paused, remembering the morning he'd walked into the office to find empty desks where his colleagues used to sit. "I should have said something then, should have pushed back on the unrealistic expectations. But I was scared. The tech industry is brutal right now, and I couldn't afford to lose my job, not when I knew you needed support." "Danny," Leah said softly, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I need to get this all out." She nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "So I started working longer hours. 60 hours a week became 70, then 80. I was coming home exhausted, barely able to function, but I kept telling myself it was temporary. That once we got through this crunch period, things would go back to normal." Danny's voice grew quieter as he continued. "But they didn't go back to normal. They just kept piling on more work. And meanwhile, I was trying to keep up with everything else, checking on you, helping with your appointments, making sure you had groceries, fixing things around your house." "I never asked you to do all that," Leah said, guilt creeping into her voice. "I know you didn't. But I wanted to, I needed to. After Grandpa died, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't let you face everything alone. But I was so focused on keeping that promise that I didn't realize I was drowning." Danny stood up, pacing to the window where he could see the rain streaming down the glass. 3 months ago, Jenna and I had our first real fight. She said I was never present anymore, that even when I was with her, I was checking my phone constantly, worried about you or stressed about work. She said it felt like she was dating a ghost. The memory of that fight was still raw. Jenna had been patient for months, understanding about his work stress and his commitment to his grandmother. But patience had its limits, and Danny had pushed past them without even realizing it. I tried to explain to her that I couldn't just turn off my worry about you, that I needed to be available in case you needed something. But she said I was using my concern for you as an excuse to avoid dealing with my own problems. Was she right? Leah asked gently. Danny considered the question. Partially, I was using my responsibilities as a way to avoid confronting how miserable I was at work. It was easier to focus on taking care of you than to admit that I was failing at managing my own life. He returned to his chair, sitting forward with his elbows on his knees. The worst part was that I started to resent everything. Not you, never you, but the situation. I resented having to work 80 hours a week just to keep up. I resented that Mom and Dad were in Denver, building their new life while I was here, feeling like I was falling apart. I resented that I couldn't figure out how to balance everything. And I was adding to that pressure, Leah said, her voice heavy with understanding. You weren't adding to it, Danny said firmly. You were part of my life that I actually cared about. But I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't see the difference between the things that mattered and the things that were just obligations. Danny ran his hands through his hair, remembering the spiral of the past few months. I started having panic attacks at work. Full on, can't breathe. Heart-racing panic attacks. I'd lock myself in the bathroom and try to calm down, but I couldn't tell anyone what was happening because I was afraid they'd think I couldn't handle the job. Oh, Danny, Leah whispered. I started seeing a therapist, he continued. Well, I went to 3 sessions before I convinced myself I didn't have time for it. She told me I was showing signs of burnout, that I needed to set boundaries and ask for help. But I couldn't figure out how to do that without letting everyone down. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Danny had been receiving professional advice about the exact same issues his grandmother had been struggling with, and neither of them had felt able to share their burdens with the other. 2 weeks ago, I had a complete meltdown at work, Danny admitted. I was in a meeting with my manager, and he was talking about adding another project to my workload. I just broke, started crying right there in the conference room. Had to leave early and spent the rest of the day in my car, wondering how I'd gotten to that point. What did you do? I called in sick the next day and spent it in bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how I was failing everyone. You, Jenna, my parents, my boss. I felt like I was letting down every person who mattered to me. Danny's voice cracked as he remembered that dark day. That's when I started having the thoughts that scared me. Not about hurting myself, but about just disappearing. Running away from everything and everyone because I couldn't figure out how to make it work. Is that what you meant when you said you felt like you were dying? Yeah. I felt like the person I used to be was disappearing under all the pressure. Like I was being erased by my own inability to handle my life. Danny looked at his grandmother, seeing his own pain reflected in her eyes. Last Sunday, when Tommy texted me about how you were doing, I was having one of those moments. I'd just gotten off a call with my manager about working through the weekend, and I was sitting at your table thinking about how I was failing you too. How I was supposed to be taking care of you, but I was barely keeping my own head above water. And when you typed, "Just die already," I was thinking about how I felt like I was dying under all the pressure. About how I wished the overwhelmed, anxious, failing version of myself would just disappear, so I could be the person you needed me to be. Leah was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd shared. You've been carrying all of this alone. I thought I had to. I thought asking for help meant admitting I was weak. And I thought needing help meant I was a burden. They sat in the weight of their parallel struggles, both of them recognizing how their individual attempts to protect each other had created a cycle of isolation and misunderstanding. I need to tell you something else, Danny said quietly. About Mom and Dad. Leah tensed slightly. What about them? They don't know how bad things have gotten. For either of us. I've been telling them everything was fine because I didn't want them to worry or feel guilty about moving to Denver. But they should know. They should be part of figuring out how to support you. I don't want to be a burden to them either. Grandma, you're not a burden. You're their family. Mom calls you every few days because she loves you and misses you. Dad asks about you constantly. They moved to Denver for Dad's job, but they didn't stop caring about you. But they have their own lives now, and you're part of their lives. You always have been. Danny leaned forward, taking his grandmother's hands in his. I need you to understand something. The reason I've been so stressed about taking care of you isn't because I don't want to do it. It's because I want to do it so badly that I was willing to sacrifice everything else in my life to make sure you were okay. That's not healthy, Leah said softly. No, it's not. But it comes from love. Everything I've done, every sleepless night worrying about you, every grocery run and every doctor's appointment, it all comes from love. I just didn't know how to love you in a way that was sustainable. And I didn't know how to accept love without feeling guilty about it. So we both have some learning to do. Leah squeezed his hands. What do we do now? Now we ask for help, Danny said. We call Mom and Dad and tell them what's really been happening. We look into support services for you. We figure out how to create a system where you're safe and cared for, but I'm not drowning in the process. What about your job? I'm going to talk to my manager about reducing my hours or redistributing my workload, and if they won't work with me, I'll find another job. I can't keep living like this. And to Jenna? Danny smiled for the first time in weeks. I'm going to apologize for being absent from our relationship and ask her to help me figure out how to be present while still taking care of the people I love. She's a good person, Leah said. She sees how much you care about me. She also sees how much I was hurting, even when I couldn't admit it to myself. They sat together in the comfortable silence that comes after difficult truths have been shared. The rain continued outside, but it no longer sounded ominous. Instead, it seemed to be washing away the misunderstandings and fears that had accumulated between them. I'm sorry I put you through this week, Leah said finally. I'm sorry I made you worry. I'm sorry I put you in a position where you felt like you had to carry your concerns alone, Danny replied. We're both sorry, and we're both going to do better. Are we going to be okay? Danny looked at his grandmother, really looked at her, and saw not a burden or an obligation, but the woman who had taught him to read, who had listened to his childhood fears, who had cheered at his graduation and cried at his grandfather's funeral. He saw family in all its complicated, messy, imperfect glory. We're going to be more than okay, he said. We're going to be honest with each other, and that's going to make all the difference. Outside, the rain began to ease, and the first hints of evening light filtered through the clouds. The storm was passing, leaving behind the clean, fresh scent of new beginnings. The sound of Leah Douglas's rental car pulling into the driveway the next morning cut through the quiet of Danny's restless sleep. He'd spent the night on his grandmother's couch, neither of them wanting to be alone after the emotional weight of their conversation. Through the living room window, he watched his mother emerge from the silver sedan, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from the early morning flight, her face etched with the kind of worry that transcended professional composure. She's here, Danny called softly to Leah, who was already up and moving around the kitchen with more energy than she'd shown in weeks. I can see that, Leah replied, and Danny caught something in her voice. Nervousness, perhaps, or the particular anxiety that comes with knowing difficult conversations are ahead. Lisa's knock was gentle, but urgent. When Leah opened the door, mother and daughter-in-law stood facing each other for a moment, both taking in the visible signs of the stress they'd been carrying. Lisa's eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and worry, while Leah's face showed the pale, drawn look of someone who'd been sleeping poorly for days. Oh, Leah, Lisa said, stepping forward to embrace her. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. You're here now, Leah replied, and Danny heard the relief in her voice. That's what matters. As they settled in the living room, Danny noticed how his mother's trained eye was cataloging the same details he'd observed the day before. The drawn curtains, the sparse evidence of meals, the general atmosphere of a house where someone had been merely existing rather than living. Danny filled me in on some of what's been happening, Lisa began carefully. But I want to hear it from you. How are you really doing? For the first time in days, Leah's careful composure cracked slightly. I've been better, she admitted. I've been struggling. Tell me about the struggling. Danny watched his grandmother gather her thoughts, recognizing the librarian's instinct to organize information before sharing it. I've been feeling like I'm becoming too much trouble for everyone, like I'm holding people back from living their own lives. What gave you that impression? Leah glanced at Danny, who nodded encouragingly. There was a misunderstanding, she said. I thought Danny was... Well, I thought he wished I wasn't around anymore. It turns out I was wrong, but by the time we figured that out, I'd already spent a week convincing myself that everyone would be better off without me. Lisa's expression shifted from concern to something approaching alarm. Leah, when you say everyone would be better off without you, what exactly do you mean? I mean, I thought about... Ending things, Leah said quietly. Not seriously. I don't think I ever would have actually done it. But the thought was there. The silence that followed was heavy, with the weight of what could have been lost. Lisa reached over and took Leah's hand, her marketing executive's composure completely abandoned in favor of raw maternal instinct. I'm so sorry, Lisa said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry you felt that alone. It wasn't your fault, Leah protested. You have your own life to live. You are part of my life, Lisa said firmly. You have been for 28 years. When I married Danny's father, I didn't just marry him. I married into this family. That includes you. Danny watched the exchange with growing understanding of how his family's good intentions had created invisible barriers. Everyone had been trying to protect everyone else, but in doing so, they'd isolated themselves from the very support they all needed. I need to call Sarah, Lisa said suddenly. She should be here for this conversation. You don't need to bring Sarah into this, Leah protested. She has her own family to worry about. Leah, you are her family too, and this affects all of us. Within an hour, Sarah Douglas had made the 3-hour drive from Portland, arriving with a covered dish and the slightly frazzled look of someone who'd dropped everything to respond to a family crisis. At 45, she shared her mother's practical demeanor, but had inherited her father's tendency toward direct communication. Okay, Sarah said, settling into the chair that had become the designated family meeting spot. I've heard bits and pieces from Lisa, but I want to understand the full situation. What's been happening? Danny found himself recounting the events of the past week from his perspective, while Leah filled in her own experience of isolation and despair. Sarah listened without interruption, asking clarifying questions and taking notes in the small notebook she always carried. So let me see if I understand this correctly, Sarah said when they'd finished. Danny, you've been working 80 hours a week while trying to be Leah's primary caregiver, and you've been having panic attacks because you're completely overwhelmed. Leah, you've been feeling like a burden and actually contemplated suicide because you thought your family wished you were dead. And Lisa, you've been calling regularly but haven't visited in 6 months because you're trying to establish yourself in Denver. The stark summary hung in the air, making the dysfunction of their situation undeniable. When you put it like that, Danny said, it sounds pretty dysfunctional. It sounds like a family that loves each other but has terrible communication, Sarah corrected. And it sounds like we've all been trying to solve this independently instead of working together. What do you mean? Leah asked. I mean that Danny's been trying to be everything to you because he thinks that's what family obligation requires. You've been trying to minimize your needs because you don't want to be a burden. Lisa's been trying to support from a distance because she feels guilty about leaving. And I've been coordinating bits and pieces of care while assuming everyone else had the big picture handled. Quote, Sarah flipped through her notebook. None of us has been working with complete information about what the others need or what they're capable of providing. So what do? Lisa asked. We figure out what Leah actually needs, what each of us can realistically provide, and how to fill in the gaps with professional services or community resources. Danny felt a flutter of hope. This was the first time anyone had talked about the situation as a problem to be solved, rather than a burden to be endured. What do you think I need? Leah asked, and Danny heard genuine curiosity in her voice. I think you need safety, companionship, and purpose, Sarah said without hesitation. You need to know that if something happens to you, help will come quickly. You need regular social interaction with people who care about you. And you need to feel like you're contributing something meaningful to the world. Those sound like reasonable needs, Leah said slowly. They are reasonable needs. The question is how to meet them in a way that's sustainable for everyone involved. For the next hour, they worked through the practical aspects of Leah's situation. Sarah had researched senior living options on her drive from Portland, while Lisa had made a list of support services available in Seattle. Danny contributed his observations about his grandmother's daily routines and the areas where she most needed assistance. There's something else we need to address, Sarah said as their planning session began to wind down. We need to figure out how to communicate better as a family. This crisis happened because we were all protecting each other from information that we actually needed to share. What do you mean? Danny asked. I mean that Leah needs to feel comfortable telling us when she's struggling, instead of suffering in silence. Danny needs to be able to say when he's overwhelmed, without feeling like he's failing us. Lisa needs to be honest about the limitations of what she can provide from Denver. And I need to stop assuming that everyone else has everything under control. That sounds harder than arranging care services, Leah observed. It probably is, Sarah agreed. But it's also more important. The care services will help with the practical aspects. But better communication will prevent us from having another crisis like this one. As the afternoon wore on, Danny found himself marveling at how different the house felt with the entire family present. The heaviness that had characterized the space for weeks was lifting, replaced by the productive energy of people working together toward a common goal. I have an idea, Lisa said suddenly. What if we instituted regular family meetings? Not crisis meetings like this one, but scheduled check-ins where we all share what's going on with us? Like a monthly call, Danny asked. More than that. What if we committed to being more transparent about our struggles and our needs? What if we made it okay to ask for help? That would be a significant change from how we've been operating, Leah said thoughtfully. Maybe that's what we need, Sarah replied. A significant change. Danny looked around the room at his family. His grandmother, who had been contemplating ending her life just days before. His mother, who had dropped everything to fly across the country. His aunt, who had driven 3 hours to help solve a problem that wasn't technically hers to solve. I think we can do this, he said. I think we can figure out how to take care of each other without anyone drowning in the process. Are you sure? Leah asked. I'm sure we can try, Danny replied. And I'm sure we can ask for help when we need it. Then let's try, she said, and for the first time in weeks, Danny heard hope in her voice. The next morning brought a different kind of energy to Leah's house. Instead of the heavy silence that had characterized the past week, there was the productive hum of a family mobilizing around a shared mission. Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, researching senior living communities while Lisa made phone calls to various support services. Danny had taken the day off work, a decision that would have been unthinkable just weeks before, and was helping his grandmother sort through paperwork that had been accumulating unopened. There's a place called Sunset Manor that looks promising, Sarah announced, turning her laptop screen toward the group. It's only 10 minutes from here, and they have different levels of care available. Independent living apartments, but with meal services and activities. Leah peered at the screen, her expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. It looks nice, she said carefully, but I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that. We don't have to decide anything today, Lisa said, ending her phone call and joining the conversation. The point is to explore options, to understand what's available if and when you need it. What kind of options? Leah asked. Well, I just spoke with someone from Senior Services of Seattle. They have a program where they can provide daily check-ins, either by phone or in person. They also have volunteer programs where people can help with errands, companionship, that sort of thing. Danny looked up from the stack of medical bills he'd been organizing. What about the meal delivery services? Jenna mentioned those when we talked yesterday. Meals on Wheels is one option, Sarah said, pulling up another tab on her browser. But there are also grocery delivery services, prepared meal companies that cater to seniors. The key is finding something that works with your preferences and dietary needs. I like cooking, Leah said, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. I'm not ready to give up cooking. Nobody's asking you to give up cooking, Danny said gently. We're just trying to make sure you have options for days when you don't feel like cooking or when it's difficult to get to the grocery store. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Danny opened it to find Jenna standing on the porch, holding a coffee carrier and a bag from the local bakery. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, glancing past Danny at the assembled family. I thought you might need some caffeine fuel for your planning session. You're not interrupting at all, Lisa said, standing to greet her. We could definitely use the caffeine. And the moral support. As Jenna distributed coffee and pastries, Danny noticed how naturally she integrated herself into the family dynamic. She asked thoughtful questions about their research, offered professional insights about senior care from her nursing background, And most importantly, she listened to Leah's concerns without judgment. One thing I've observed in my work, Jenna said, settling into a chair beside Leah, is that the most successful transitions happen gradually. Rather than making one big change, you might consider implementing small improvements over time. What kind of small improvements? Leah asked. Well, for example, you mentioned that you're not ready for a senior living community. But what if you started with just 1 or 2 services? Maybe a weekly grocery delivery, or a weekly housekeeping service. Something that makes daily life a little easier, without requiring major lifestyle changes. That sounds more manageable, Leah admitted. And then, if those services work well, you can add others. Or, if you find that you need more support than anticipated, you can adjust accordingly. Danny watched his grandmother's face as she considered Jenna's suggestion. The panic that had appeared at the mention of senior living was fading, replaced by something closer to thoughtful consideration. The other thing to consider, Jenna continued, is that accepting help doesn't mean giving up independence. It can actually preserve independence by ensuring that you have the support you need to continue living on your own terms. I never thought of it that way, Leah said slowly. A lot of people don't. But I've seen patients who refused help when they needed it, and they ended up in crisis situations that required much more dramatic interventions. The patients who accepted help early were often able to maintain their autonomy much longer. The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Danny answered to find Marcus Thompson's voice on the other end. Danny, I hope I'm not intruding. I noticed all the cars in the driveway and wondered if everything was okay. Actually, Marcus, would you like to come over? We're having a family meeting about care arrangements for Grandma, and I think your professional perspective might be helpful. I'd be happy to help if I can. Give me 5 minutes. When Marcus arrived, he brought with him the calm authority of someone who had spent decades helping families navigate difficult transitions. He listened to their plans with the focused attention of a professional, asking clarifying questions and offering practical suggestions. You're on the right track, he said after they'd outlined their preliminary plans. But I'd like to suggest one additional element: emergency planning. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I mean having clear protocols for what happens if Leah has a health emergency, or if the primary caregiver, in this case, Danny, becomes unavailable for some reason. Danny felt his chest tighten. What kind of protocols? Simple things. A medical alert system so Leah can call for help if she falls or has a health crisis. A list of emergency contacts that includes not just family but also neighbors, her doctor, and key services. A plan for medication management if she becomes unable to manage it herself. That sounds a bit morbid, Leah said. It's practical, Marcus replied kindly, and it's actually liberating. When you know there's a plan for emergencies, you can relax and focus on living rather than worrying about what might happen. He's right, Jenna added. In the hospital, we see a lot of preventable crises that happen because people didn't have plans in place. Having protocols doesn't mean expecting the worst. It means being prepared so you can enjoy the best. The conversation continued for another hour, with the family refining their plans and dividing up responsibilities. Sarah would research and visit potential senior living communities, not with the goal of immediate placement, but to understand future options. Lisa would coordinate with services in Seattle and plan monthly visits. Danny would help implement the initial support services while also working on better work-life balance. What about me? Leah asked. What's my role in all this? Your role is to be honest about what you need, Lisa said, and to accept help when it's offered. And to remember that needing help doesn't make you a burden, Danny added. It makes you human. As the family meeting began to wind down, Tommy Kim appeared at the door. He looked sheepish and uncertain, clearly aware that he'd arrived in the middle of something significant. Sorry to interrupt, he said when Danny opened the door. I wanted to check on you. You seemed pretty stressed when you texted me last week. Danny felt his stomach drop. He'd forgotten about Tommy's role in the original misunderstanding, and now his friend was standing in the doorway with the entire family present. Actually, Tommy, I'm glad you're here, Danny said, making a quick decision. There's something I need to explain to you about that text conversation we had. Tommy's confusion was evident as Danny explained the context of his "just die already" message, and how his grandmother had misinterpreted it. As the story unfolded, Tommy's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, to something approaching horror. "Oh my God," Tommy said, looking directly at Leah. "Mrs. Douglas, I'm so sorry. If I'd had any idea that you saw that message." "You couldn't have known," Leah said gently. "And it wasn't your fault that I misunderstood, but I should have been more supportive when Danny was struggling. I should have realized he was drowning and offered to help instead of just listening to him vent." "You were being a good friend," Danny said. "Sometimes people need someone to vent to. But I could have been a better friend. I could have suggested that you talk to your family about what you were going through, or encouraged you to get professional help." Marcus leaned forward. "Tommy, one of the things we've been discussing today is how to build better support systems. Are you interested in being part of that?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that Danny's going to need friends who understand what he's dealing with. Friends who can offer practical support, not just a listening ear." Tommy's face brightened. "I'd like that. I want to help." "Good," Sarah said, making a note in her ever-present notebook. "Because we're going to need all the help we can get." As the afternoon wore on, the assembled group began to feel less like a crisis intervention team and more like a community. They shared stories, made plans, and began to weave the kind of support network that had been missing from their lives. "I have an idea," Jenna said as they began to clean up coffee cups and paperwork. "What if we made this a regular thing? Not necessarily the crisis meetings, but family gatherings where we check in with each other? Like a monthly dinner," Lisa suggested. "Or a weekly coffee hour," Sarah added. "Something regular but not overwhelming." "I like that idea," Leah said. "I've missed having people in the house on a regular basis." "Then it's settled," Danny said. "Weekly coffee hour at Grandma's house. Everyone's invited, and everyone's expected to share what's really going on with them." "Number more protecting each other from the truth," Lisa agreed. "No more suffering in silence," Sarah added. "And no more assuming that everyone else has everything under control," Marcus concluded. As the group began to disperse, Danny found himself standing in his grandmother's kitchen, looking around at the evidence of their planning session. Notebooks filled with research, business cards from various services, printouts of senior living communities. It looked like the aftermath of a successful campaign, which, in many ways, it had been. "Are you feeling overwhelmed?" Leah asked, joining him in the kitchen. "Actually, I'm feeling hopeful," Danny replied. "For the first time in months, I feel like we have a plan that might actually work. Even if it means accepting help from other people? Especially because it means accepting help from other people." Leah smiled, the first genuine smile Danny had seen from her in weeks. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually looking forward to trying some of these services. The grocery delivery sounds particularly appealing. And I'm looking forward to not working 80 hours a week. Are you going to talk to your manager about that?" "I'm going to talk to my manager about a lot of things, including the fact that I need to be able to take time off for family emergencies without feeling guilty about it. And if they won't work with you, then I'll find a company that will. I've learned that some things are more important than job security." As they stood together in the kitchen where this crisis had first been revealed, Danny realized that the house felt different again, not just because of the family gathering, but because the secrets that had been poisoning the air between them had been cleared away. The truth, as painful as it had been to reveal, had made space for something better to grow. "We're going to be okay," he said, and this time he truly believed it. "We're going to be better than okay," Leah replied. "We're going to be honest with each other. And that's going to make all the difference." Outside, the October afternoon was giving way to evening, but the darkness no longer felt ominous. Instead, it felt like the natural progression of a day well spent, a family crisis successfully navigated, and the beginning of something new and more sustainable. The bridges they'd built today would need ongoing maintenance, but they had a solid foundation: love, honesty, and the commitment to face whatever came next together. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the windows of Sunset Manor's dining room, casting warm light across the table, where Leah Douglas sat with her new friends, Eleanor and Frank. The senior living community had become home in ways she hadn't expected when she'd first toured the facility with Sarah back in November. "So your grandson is finally proposing?" Eleanor asked, her eyes twinkling with the kind of delight that came from watching other people's love stories unfold. "This weekend," Leah confirmed, unable to suppress her smile. "He's been planning it for months." "Poor boy has been so nervous he can barely eat." "Where's he doing it?" Frank wanted to know. He was a retired engineer who appreciated the details of well-executed plans. "Pike Place Market. It's where they had their first date. Jenna thinks they're just going for their usual Saturday morning coffee, but Danny's arranged for the whole family to be there." "How romantic," Eleanor sighed. "My Harold proposed to me in a gas station. Not nearly as elegant, but it was perfect for us." Leah found herself marveling at how natural this conversation felt. 6 months ago, she'd been convinced that her life was effectively over, that she'd become nothing more than a burden to the people she loved. Now she was part of a community where her stories mattered, where her experiences were valued, where she could offer advice and support to others navigating similar challenges. The transition to Sunset Manor hadn't been immediate. It had taken 3 months of gradually increasing support services at her house before she'd felt ready to make the move. First came the grocery delivery service, which had been such a relief that she'd wondered why she'd resisted it. Then the weekly housekeeping service, which freed up her energy for activities she actually enjoyed. The daily check-in calls from senior services had provided both peace of mind and gentle accountability for taking medications and maintaining routines. But it was the loneliness that had ultimately convinced her to consider the senior living community. Despite the weekly family gatherings that had become a treasured tradition, despite Marcus's regular visits and the expanding network of support services, she'd still found herself spending too many hours alone with her thoughts. "The thing about living alone," she'd told Danny during one of their honest conversations, "is that you start to lose perspective. You start to think that your problems are either bigger than they are, or that they don't matter to anyone else." "And here?" he'd asked, gesturing around the Sunset Manor apartment they'd been touring. "Here, I'd have people to talk to. People who understand what it's like to be this age, dealing with these kinds of changes." The apartment she'd chosen was smaller than her house, but it was perfectly designed for her needs. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchenette for the cooking she still enjoyed, and a living area large enough for the furniture and mementos that mattered most to her. The kitchen in her house had been converted into a home office for Danny, who had successfully negotiated a hybrid work arrangement that allowed him to work from home 2 days a week. "The irony," she'd told Marcus during his first visit to her new apartment, "is that I'm more independent now than I was when I was living alone." "How so?" "Because I'm not spending all my energy on maintaining a house and worrying about what would happen if something went wrong. I can focus on the things that actually matter to me." Those things, it turned out, included more than she'd realized. She'd started a book club for fellow residents, drawing on her decades of library experience to facilitate discussions about literature. She'd begun volunteering with the community's family support program, helping other families navigate the transition to senior living. And most surprisingly, she'd started writing not just journal entries, but actual stories about her experiences that she hoped might help other people going through similar challenges. "Mrs. Douglas?" A young woman's voice interrupted her breakfast conversation. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to talk with a family that's touring the facility today." Leah looked up to see Amanda, one of the community's social workers, standing beside their table with a slightly nervous expression. "Of course. What's the situation?" "It's a grandmother and her adult son. She's been reluctant to consider senior living, and her son is worried about her safety. They're in a very similar situation to what you described when you first moved here." "I'd be happy to talk with them," Leah said, rising from the table. "Eleanor, Frank, would you mind if I borrowed a few minutes?" "Go ahead, dear," Eleanor said. "We'll save you some of those blueberry muffins." As Leah walked with Amanda toward the lobby, she reflected on how much her perspective had changed. 6 months ago, she would have been mortified at the idea of discussing her personal struggles with strangers. Now, she understood that sharing her story was one of the most valuable things she could offer. The family waiting in the lobby looked exactly as she'd expected. a woman in her 70s trying to maintain dignity while clearly feeling overwhelmed, and a man in his 40s carrying the weight of worry and responsibility. She recognized the dynamic immediately. "Hello," she said, approaching them with a warm smile. "I'm Leah Douglas. Amanda thought you might like to hear about my experience here." The conversation that followed was familiar territory. The grandmother, Margaret, expressed concerns about giving up her independence, about becoming a burden, about losing her identity. Her son, Robert, spoke about sleepless nights worrying about his mother's safety, about the strain on his marriage, about feeling like he was failing everyone. "I felt exactly the same way," Leah told them, settling into one of the lobby's comfortable chairs. "I was convinced that moving here meant admitting defeat, that I was giving up on life." "But you adjusted?" Margaret asked hopefully. "I thrived," Leah corrected. "And I'm not just saying that to make you feel better. I'm genuinely happier here than I was living alone in my house." "What changed?" "I stopped trying to prove that I didn't need help, and I started focusing on what I wanted to do with my life. It turns out I needed less help than I thought I did, but I needed it consistently. And having that support freed me up to do things that actually mattered to me." She spent the next hour sharing her story, showing them around the facility, and introducing them to other residents. By the time they left, Margaret was asking about availability, and Robert was looking less like a man carrying the weight of the world. "You're good at this," Amanda observed as they watched the family drive away. "I'm good at it because I've been there," Leah replied. "It helps to know that other people have faced the same fears and come out the other side." The rest of the morning passed in the comfortable routine that had become natural to her. She spent an hour in the community garden, tending to the herb plot she'd claimed as her own. She attended a watercolor class, where her complete lack of artistic talent was more than compensated for by her enthusiasm. She had lunch with a rotating group of friends, each meal bringing different conversations and perspectives. At 2 o'clock, Danny arrived for their weekly coffee date. This tradition had evolved from the crisis meetings of 6 months ago into something much more relaxed and enjoyable. They met every Tuesday afternoon, sometimes at Sunset Manor, sometimes at a local coffee shop, always with the understanding that this was time to really talk about what was happening in their lives. "So," Danny said, settling into the chair across from her in the community's coffee corner, "are you ready for this weekend?" "I think I should be asking you that question," Leah replied with a grin. "You're the one who's been pacing around like a caged tiger for the past week." "I'm nervous," Danny admitted. "What if she says no?" "Danny, that woman is head over heels in love with you. She's been dropping hints about marriage for months. She's not going to say no, but what if? What if nothing? You're borrowing trouble. She loves you, you love her, and you're both ready for this next step. Stop overthinking it." Danny laughed, the sound more relaxed than it had been in weeks. "When did you become the voice of reason in this relationship?" "When I stopped being so worried about my own problems that I couldn't see yours clearly." It was a casual comment, but it carried weight. Both of them understood how much their relationship had changed over the past 6 months. The crisis that had nearly torn them apart had ultimately brought them closer together, but in a different way than before. Instead of Danny feeling responsible for managing his grandmother's life, and Leah feeling guilty about needing support, they'd found a balance that worked for both of them. "Speaking of problems," Danny said, "I have some good news. I got the promotion." "Danny, that's wonderful! Senior developer?" "With a team to manage and everything. And the best part is, they're so pleased with how well the hybrid work arrangement has been working that they're making it permanent policy for the whole department." "That's fantastic. How's Jenna handling the idea of you having more responsibility?" "She's thrilled. She says I'm a completely different person when I'm not constantly stressed about work." And she's right. I am different. Leah studied her grandson's face, noting the changes that had occurred over the past 6 months. The constant tension around his eyes had disappeared. His shoulders weren't permanently hunched with stress. He laughed more easily, slept better, and had regained the enthusiasm for life that had been buried under months of overwhelming responsibility. "The therapy is helping?" she asked. "The therapy is helping a lot. Dr. Martinez says I'm making good progress on setting boundaries and asking for help when I need it. And work? Work is actually enjoyable now that I'm not trying to do 3 people's jobs." Turns out I'm pretty good at what I do when I'm not exhausted and panicked all the time. They talked for another hour about wedding plans, work projects, and the small details of daily life that had become precious to both of them. As their visit wound down, Danny pulled out his phone to show her photos from his most recent hiking trip with Jenna. "Look at this view," he said, swiping through pictures of mountain vistas and forest trails. "We're planning to go back there for our honeymoon." "It's beautiful," Leah said, studying the photos. "I'm so glad you're making time for things like this. I'm glad I have someone to share them with. And I'm glad I'm not too tired to enjoy them." As Danny prepared to leave, he paused at the door of her apartment. "Grandma, I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I need to tell you that I'm proud of you. For making this transition, for building this new life, for being willing to accept help when you needed it. I know it wasn't easy." "I'm proud of you too," Leah replied. "For learning to take care of yourself while still taking care of the people you love. That's not an easy balance to find." "We both learned some things, didn't we? We learned that love doesn't have to be overwhelming to be real. That taking care of each other doesn't have to mean sacrificing everything else. That families can be supportive without being codependent. And that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. And that accepting help is a gift you give to the people who love you." After Danny left, Leah sat in her apartment looking out at the courtyard where several residents were playing bocce ball. 6 months ago, she'd been convinced that her life was effectively over, that she had nothing left to contribute to the world. Now she understood that she'd simply been in the wrong environment for the person she'd become. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How did the family visit go this morning? Amanda said you were wonderful with them." Leah smiled as she typed back, "It went well. I think they're going to be okay." "Just like we are," came Sarah's immediate response. "Just like we are," Leah agreed. The evening brought dinner with friends, a movie in the community theater, and a phone call from Lisa in Denver. "I'm so excited about this weekend," Lisa said, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "I can't believe our Danny is finally proposing. I can't believe how long it took him to work up the courage," Leah replied. "Though I suppose we all needed time to figure out how to do relationships better. Speaking of which, how are you settling in with your new routine?" "I love it here, Lisa. I really do. I have friends, I have activities, I have support when I need it, and independence when I want it. It's exactly what I needed." And Danny seems so much happier. He is happier. We all are. It turns out that crisis can be a gift, if you let it teach you what you need to learn. "What did you learn?" Leah considered the question. "I learned that needing help doesn't make you a burden. I learned that accepting love doesn't mean becoming dependent. I learned that family relationships work best when everyone is honest about what they need and what they can provide. And I learned that I can contribute to my family's well-being even when I'm not physically present for every moment of their lives. And Danny learned that he can take care of the people he loves without sacrificing his own well-being. We all learned that love is more sustainable when it's shared among many people instead of concentrated in one relationship." As they ended their call, Leah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she'd been ready to give up on life because she thought her grandson wished she would die. Now she understood that what he'd actually been wishing for was a way to love her without drowning in the process. The solution hadn't been for her to need less, or for him to give more. The solution had been for them to build a community of support that could meet everyone's needs in sustainable ways. Tomorrow would bring another day of activities, friendships, and meaningful conversations. Danny would continue building his career and his relationship with Jenna. The family would gather for their weekly coffee hour, sharing the honest updates that had become their new normal. And Leah would continue to thrive in the life she'd built for herself, a life that was rich with purpose, connection, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you're loved and needed. The rhythms were new, but they were good. And for the first time in years, Leah looked forward to tomorrow. The Pike Place Market bustled with its usual Saturday morning energy as Leah positioned herself strategically behind the flower stall, her heart racing with anticipation. Around her, the rest of the Douglas family had spread out in carefully coordinated positions, Lisa pretending to examine produce at a nearby stand, Sarah browsing books at a small vendor's table, and Marcus positioned near the coffee cart where Danny and Jenna were about to arrive. "Can you see them yet?" Tommy whispered, appearing at her elbow with barely contained excitement. Over the past 6 months, he'd become an unofficial member of the family, his guilt over the original misunderstanding having transformed into genuine dedication to supporting both Danny and Leah. "Not yet," Leah replied, checking her watch. "They should be here any minute." The past week had been a whirlwind of secret planning and barely contained nerves. Danny had confided his proposal plans to the family during their regular Sunday dinner, and somehow a simple romantic gesture had evolved into a full family celebration. Jenna had no idea that her usual Saturday morning coffee date was about to become one of the most important moments of her life. "There they are," Sarah called softly, spotting Danny and Jenna making their way through the crowd toward their favorite coffee vendor. Leah watched her grandson, noting how different he looked from the overwhelmed, exhausted young man who had sat in her living room 6 months ago. His shoulders were relaxed, his smile genuine, and there was a lightness to his step that spoke of someone who had found balance in his life. Beside him, Jenna looked radiant in the morning light, her face animated, as she told him something that made him laugh. "He's really going to do it," Tommy said, sounding almost as nervous as Danny looked. "He's ready," Leah said with certainty. "They both are." As they watched, Danny guided Jenna to a quiet spot near the flower stall, away from the heaviest foot traffic but still within sight of the strategically positioned family members. He was speaking to her, gesturing with his hands in the way he'd inherited from his grandfather, and Leah could see the exact moment when Jenna realized this wasn't their usual casual coffee date. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, "he's doing it." Danny dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box, and even from a distance, Leah could see Jenna's hand fly to her mouth in surprise. The young woman's face cycled through shock, joy, and overwhelming emotion as Danny spoke words that were lost in the market's ambient noise, but clearly had the desired effect. "She's saying yes," Lisa breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Of course she's saying yes," Leah said, her own eyes filling with tears. "Look at how happy they are." The family converged on the newly engaged couple, emerging from their hiding spots with congratulations and embraces. Jenna spotted Leah first, her face lighting up even brighter as she rushed forward. "Did you know?" Jenna asked, pulling Leah into a fierce hug. "I may have had some advance notice," Leah admitted, laughing through her tears. "Welcome to the family, officially." "I can't believe you all kept this secret," Jenna said, looking around at the assembled group. "How long have you been planning this?" "Weeks," Danny said, slipping his arm around his new fiancée. "I wanted everyone here because you've become part of all our lives. This wasn't just about us. It was about celebrating what we've all built together." As the group made their way to a nearby restaurant for an impromptu celebration brunch, Leah found herself marveling at how much had changed since that devastating evening when she'd first seen Danny's text message. The family that had been fractured by miscommunication and hidden struggles had been rebuilt into something stronger and more honest. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Marcus asked, falling into step beside her as they walked. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now," Leah said. "A year ago, I was convinced I was nothing but a burden to my family. Now I'm here celebrating my grandson's engagement, surrounded by people who care about me and whom I care about in return." "Crisis has a way of clarifying what really matters," Marcus observed. "The question is whether people are willing to do the work to rebuild after the crisis passes." "And we did the work. You all did the work. And it shows." The celebration brunch stretched into the afternoon, filled with stories, laughter, and the easy conversation that comes when people are genuinely comfortable with each other. Leah watched Danny and Jenna, noting how they'd found their own balance, supporting each other without losing themselves, building a partnership that enhanced rather than constrained their individual growth. "When are you thinking of having the wedding?" Lisa asked, pulling out her phone to start making notes. "Next spring," Jenna said, glancing at Danny for confirmation. "April or May, maybe. Something simple and outdoors." "I know a wonderful venue," Sarah offered. "There's a garden in Portland that does small weddings. Very intimate, very beautiful." "That sounds perfect," Jenna said. I've never wanted a big wedding. Just family and close friends. Family and close friends, Leah repeated, looking around the table at the assembled group. That's what we have here, isn't it? It's what we built, Danny said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. To family, biological and chosen. To second chances and honest conversations. To the people who stick with you through the difficult times and celebrate with you during the good ones. To love that's sustainable, Jenna added, raising her own cup. To not being afraid to ask for help, Lisa contributed. To communities that support each other, Marcus said. To new beginnings, Sarah offered. To the journey that brought us here, Tommy added, surprising everyone with his thoughtfulness. To Danny and Jenna, Leah concluded, and to the life you're building together. As they clinked cups and glasses, Leah felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The journey from that dark evening 6 months ago to this moment of celebration had been difficult, but it had been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of vulnerability, every instance of swallowing pride to accept help. Later that evening, as the family gathering wound down and people began to head home, Leah found herself alone with Danny and Jenna in the apartment at Sunset Manor. The three of them sat in comfortable silence, processing the day's events and the significance of what had occurred. I need to tell you both something, Leah said finally. I need to tell you how proud I am of what you've built together. Grandma, Danny started, but she held up a hand. Let me finish. 6 months ago, I was convinced that my life was over, that I had nothing left to contribute to the world. I was wrong about that, but I was also wrong about what relationships should look like. I thought that loving someone meant never being a burden to them, never needing anything from them. And now? Jenna asked gently. Now I understand that love is about showing up for each other, but in ways that are sustainable. It's about being honest about what you need and what you can give. It's about building communities of support so that no one person has to carry everything. You taught us that, Danny said. By being willing to move here, by accepting help, by building your own life instead of just waiting for us to take care of you. And you taught me that it's possible to love someone deeply while still maintaining your own identity and pursuing your own dreams. We all learned together, Jenna said. That's what makes this so special. As the evening drew to a close, Leah walked Danny and Jenna to the door of her apartment. The hallway was quiet, most of the other residents having settled in for the night, but the space felt alive with possibility and hope. Thank you, Danny said, pulling her into a hug. For everything. For fighting through the dark times, for building this new life, for being part of our celebration today. Thank you for not giving up on me, Leah replied. For pushing through the misunderstandings to find the truth. For being willing to do the work to rebuild our relationship. We're gonna be okay, Jenna said, joining the hug. All of us. We're gonna be more than okay. As they disappeared down the hallway, Leah stood in her doorway for a moment, looking out at the community that had become her home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments of connection and growth. But tonight, she was content to bask in the glow of celebration, grateful for the journey that had brought them all to this point. The text message that had once seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something better. Sometimes, she reflected, the most devastating moments in life were actually invitations to rebuild something stronger, more honest, and more sustainable. She closed her door and settled into her favorite chair, already looking forward to tomorrow's possibilities. 1 year later, Leah stood in the bridal suite at the Portland Garden venue, carefully adjusting the pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's around Jenna's neck. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting everything in a soft, golden glow that seemed to promise nothing but good things ahead. There, Leah said, stepping back to admire her work. Perfect. Jenna turned to face the mirror, her hand instinctively going to the pearls. Are you sure about lending me these? They're so beautiful, and so meaningful to your family. That's exactly why I want you to wear them, Leah replied, her voice warm with affection. Your family now. These pearls have been worn by Douglas brides for 3 generations. You're continuing the tradition. The year since Danny's proposal had been filled with the kind of steady happiness that Leah had once thought was impossible. The wedding planning had been a joy rather than a source of stress, with everyone contributing their strengths to create something beautiful and meaningful. Sarah had indeed found the perfect venue, Lisa had coordinated the catering with military precision, and Marcus had even offered to officiate the ceremony after getting ordained online. "How are you feeling?" Leah asked, settling into the chair beside the vanity where Jenna was doing her final makeup touches. "Nervous," Jenna admitted, "but the good kind of nervous. The kind that comes from knowing you're about to start something wonderful." "That's exactly how I felt on my wedding day," Leah said, her mind drifting back to her own wedding 48 years earlier. "Gerald was so nervous he dropped the ring during the ceremony. The best man had to crawl around on the floor of the church looking for it." "Danny's been checking his pocket every 5 minutes all morning," Jenna laughed. "I think he's convinced he's going to lose the ring." "The ring isn't what matters," Leah said gently. "What matters is the commitment you're making to each other. And from what I've seen this past year, you two understand what that commitment really means." The past year had indeed been a testament to how much Danny and Jenna had grown, both individually and as a couple. They'd navigated the challenges of wedding planning, career changes, and family dynamics with the kind of open communication that had become their trademark. When Danny had been offered a promotion that would require some travel, they'd talked through the implications together, including how it might affect the family support system they'd built. When Jenna had decided to pursue her nurse practitioner degree, they'd figured out how to balance her studies with their relationship and their ongoing commitment to family. "I have something for you too," Leah said, reaching into her purse to pull out a small wrapped package. "A little wedding gift from me to you." Jenna opened the package to find a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "Oh, Leah, it's beautiful." "I've been keeping a journal for the past year," Leah explained, "writing down all the things I've learned, all the ways our family has grown and changed. I thought you might want to start your own tradition of recording your journey with Danny." "I love it," Jenna said, running her fingers over the smooth leather cover. "I'll treasure it always." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation and Sarah poked her head in. "How are we doing in here?" "It's almost time." "We're ready," Jenna said, standing and smoothing her dress. "Are you sure I look okay?" "You look radiant," Sarah said warmly. "Danny's going to cry when he sees you." As they prepared to leave the bridal suite, Leah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The wedding was taking place in a beautiful garden setting with about 40 guests, the perfect size for the intimate celebration they'd all wanted. The guest list included family, close friends, and some of the new people who had become important in their lives over the past year. Eleanor and Frank from Sunset Manor had driven down from Seattle, delighted to be included in the celebration. Dr. Martinez, Danny's therapist, had been invited as a recognition of the important role she'd played in helping him find balance in his life. Even Amanda from the senior living community was there, having become a friend to Leah through their work together helping other families navigate similar transitions. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, offering her arm to Leah. "I've been ready for this for months," Leah replied, accepting the support with the easy grace that had replaced her former stubborn independence. The ceremony itself was everything they'd hoped for and more. The garden was in full spring bloom, with cherry blossoms and tulips creating a natural cathedral around the assembled guests. Marcus, resplendent in his best suit and a slightly nervous smile, stood at the altar waiting for the proceedings to begin. As the wedding march began, Leah watched from her front row seat as Danny took his place beside Marcus. Her grandson looked handsome and confident, a far cry from the overwhelmed young man who had sat in her living room just over a year ago. When Jenna appeared at the end of the aisle, Danny's face lit up with such pure joy that several people in the audience wiped away tears. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Danny and Jenna had written their own vows, and their words spoke of commitment, growth, and the importance of supporting each other while maintaining their individual identities. They promised to communicate honestly, to ask for help when they needed it, and to build a life together that honored both their love for each other and their responsibilities to their families. "By the power vested in me by the state of Oregon and the internet," Marcus said with a grin, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Danny, you may kiss your bride." The reception that followed was filled with laughter, dancing, and the kind of easy celebration that comes when people are genuinely happy to be together. Leah found herself moving from conversation to conversation, catching up with old friends and meeting new ones, marveling at how rich her social life had become. "This is perfect," Lisa said, joining Leah at a table overlooking the garden. "Absolutely perfect." "It is," Leah agreed, watching Danny and Jenna dance together, their faces glowing with happiness. "They're going to be wonderful together. And we're going to be wonderful together too," Lisa added. "All of us. This whole crazy extended family we've built." As the evening wound down, Leah found herself standing with Tommy and Marcus, watching the cleanup process and reflecting on the day's events. "You know what I love most about today?" Tommy said, slightly tipsy from the champagne but unusually philosophical. "It feels like a beginning, not just for Danny and Jenna but for all of us." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I mean that we've all learned how to do this better," Tommy replied. "How to be family, how to support each other, how to celebrate the good times and get through the difficult ones. And we've learned that family isn't just about blood relationships," Leah added. "It's about the people who show up for each other, who choose to be part of each other's lives." "To chosen family," Marcus said, raising his glass. "To second chances," Tommy added. "To the courage to have difficult conversations," Leah concluded. As they clinked glasses under the stars, Leah felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a devastating misunderstanding had led to this moment of celebration, surrounded by people who had learned to love each other honestly and sustainably. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new moments of connection and joy. But tonight she was content to bask in the glow of a perfect day, grateful for the journey that had brought them all to this point. The Douglas family, biological and chosen, had learned to thrive together, and that was the most beautiful ending and beginning she could imagine. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility and hope, built on the foundation of love, honesty, and the courage to keep showing up for each other, no matter what came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.